All right. Hey, everybody. This is Josh,
And this is Dean.
and we are coming to you from the frozen tundra of Texas. It's been a heck of a week down here. Texas, we got a pretty good cold snap, and most of us lost power for a big portion of the week. Dean, how have you been doing?
I've been enjoying global warming. It's been going great, freezing my ass off.
So, Dean, I think Dean's internet's still down. Is that right?
That is correct, and I am coming to you from cellular data only. So it may be a little laggy. We're just going to do the best we can.
All right. So, we'll probably have to keep this one short. Dean, what's been going on this week with the writing?
Well, I could soft pedal this, but basically nothing. I had trouble with internet all week. Our power was out probably 75% of the time from Monday to about Thursday. So I didn't get a lot done. I did get a lot of reading done because I had a lot of time to read, but that was about it. No agent searches, no progress on the agent search. I think, I can't remember if I already did this, but I sent out, the submissions to the list that I had of about 23. I think I've sent all of my submissions out for all of them. So that's where I am on that. I haven't got anything back or any responses or anything like that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. Not a lot of production on this end either. So, if we don't have anything else to add on that, let's go ahead and switch on over to one of the things that we wanted to talk about briefly this week was preparing an author biography. And so I guess I'll lead off with that. When you're writing and you have to submit, whether it's to an agent or if you're submitting to a market, you have a short story, they all want an author biography. And you want an author biography because that helps people find you and that helps people get to know you and maybe generate some interest so that they'll go find your other stuff. But an author biography can be really difficult to write the first time. It's kind of hard to talk about yourself. And it's kind of one of those things that's like writing a synopsis or summary of your novel. It's really, really difficult to distill your life and who you are down to, 50 words or something like that. Um, I've pretty well settled on one that I now have in the back of my books. And once you get one done, you probably can't really see that, but once you get one done, it's not too bad. You can kind of roll with it and then just adjust it as you go. But I'll read mine real quick. And I think mine's probably going to be a little bit different from Dean's. I assume Dean's is going to be a little bit more tailored towards his query letter. I think he also has one in the back of his book. So, Dean, I don't know if you want to share
Good
both of
point.
those or how you want to do that. But at least the one in the back of my book, I just have a little section that says about the author. Josh Craven resides in the Dallas area with his family. In addition to all things horrific, he enjoys camping, hunting, and coffee. His works include, and then I have a short list that includes my novels and novellas and short story collections. And for me, that's worked pretty well. That's very similar to what I put in my query letters. It was a little bit more expanded in my query letters, but that worked pretty well for me, and I've been pretty happy with that. So just a little something to let readers know a little something about me. They kind of get an idea of who I am and what I've done in the past based on that. Dean, what about you?
I do have a bio in and I just realized I may not be able to, I'll have to pull it up on my laptop. My query letter is on the cloud, so I can't just pull it up off my local machine. Let me see if I can pull it up off my laptop here. Okay. So in my query letter, I have a short bio that basically just goes, I'm an attorney living in the Dallas, Texas area. I practice in family law. And I wrote this novel in part based on the disparities I see in the treatment between the sexes in family court. And that was pretty much it on the query letter. And I'll read what's in the back of one of my self-published books as well. Just let me get it real quick, okay? Okay, so in the back of this collection of short stories, available on Smashwords and Amazon. It says about the author, D.W. Cook is a resident of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex where he practices law. He enjoys dancing, target shooting, and studying objectivism. His current phone number is 469-955-0768. Really. And that's fine. We can leave that in there because my phone number is all over the internet anyway. So those are both of my bios.
I think Dean, in reading those two, kind of raised a good point. One of the things that's really important in your query letter and your author biography is to let the agent know why you are the right person to have written this story, or why you lend some expertise to this story that might make them a little bit more interested in reading the manuscript. And so for Dean, for example, with this Matriarchs book, where it has a lot to do with parental rights and paternal rights versus maternal rights, things of that nature, Dean's biography includes information about his experience in family courts. And so that's a really good point that he made on that side. That's something that he might not put in the back of his books, but it's going to be extremely pertinent to his query letter for his Matriarchs novel.
Yeah, I agree. You know, you want to have something that's going to maybe hopefully connect with the agent a little bit.
Since we're having a little bit of difficulty on internet, we're going to head and fly forward and talk a little bit about what we read this week, since that's mostly what we did. I guess I'll lead off with that. I finished this book, Kinsman by Bill Pronzini. This is kind of a hard-boiled detective. It's a short novel, I would say. It's about 185 pages, but it's pretty small pages, pretty small writing. I finished that up. That one kind of took me a while. While I really enjoyed the writing style was really good. I have to say, not a lot happened for about the first 140 pages. And I've not read a lot of detective novels, so this may be true of this type of book, and I may just not know it. But about the first 140 pages was really just this guy driving around from location to location, talking to people, trying to find a clue to lead him to the next person to talk to. And he really kind of went around in literally a geographic circle for about 140 pages until, he finally got a little bit of a break that set the final episode in motion. And about the last 40 pages moved along with a pretty good clip, and there was some pretty good action in there. And I really enjoyed the last 40 pages or so of the book. This book, I'm not sure if I've really summarized it. This book is about a private detective that's hired by a woman to find the woman's missing daughter. And so he goes looking for her in this small town up in Northern California, close to the Oregon border. And in doing so, he ends up finding out that she had kind of ran off with a boyfriend that was Black, and they ended up in a small community that was apparently not very progressive. And there was a white separatist enclave that abducted
White
them.
separatist enclave in Northern California.
Yeah, and
okay.
they abducted these people and killed them. And so that was kind of the long and the short of it. It was a good book, but it wasn't overly complex. It was pretty straightforward. There weren't really any subplots or anything of that nature. It was just kind of one long thread of this guy trying to find clues until he figured out what happened to the couple.
Let me ask you this. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this about it. And I've read some more hard-boiled type detective novels, like I think the Philip Marlowe ones. That's the character, I believe, or maybe that's the author. It's either the author or the character. Raymond Chandler, I think, is the author, and I think he writes Philip Marlowe novels, or he wrote Philip Marlowe novels, and these were always set in the 30s, which was contemporary for him. And they would be set in Los Angeles. Excuse me if I'm getting characters, I may be remembering wrong authors and characters, but I know there's a series that's set in 1930s Los Angeles. And the detective character, who's a private detective, will usually get someone coming in, and he'll start on a case. And then from there, he'll maybe get another case at some point, and maybe even a third case. And then at some point, he'll realize that at least two of those cases are connected somehow. And that seems to be the pattern that you see with those novels that I read. Was that kind of the case here, or was it just one long plot thread with one long problem, and that was the only problem?
Yeah, no, in this one it was just one plot thread.
Oh, okay.
It was just the continual search for the missing young girl. So yeah, I don't know. That almost sounds like a way to generate like subplots and then tie them all back into the main plot.
Yeah, I think it was, and I almost got the impression maybe he wrote novelettes or short stories, and maybe would get them published in magazines originally, and then he would kind of, cram them together in order to put them into a novel by having them over, like there be some character overlap or some connection between them so that he could put them into a novel format and call it a novel. And I'm
Yeah,
just guessing, but I suspect that's what was going on.
yeah, that I think that would make sense. I've definitely kind of had that thought myself that when you're writing a novel, your main plot line is kind of like a really long story. And then if you incorporate a couple of subplots, that's kind of like incorporating a couple of short stories and then spacing them out and weaving them in together. And you next thing you know, you got 200 pages there.
Yeah, and that's challenging to do. I can speak from experience because I've tried to do that myself, and I feel like sometimes I end up with a novel that seems like a series of short stories versus a coherent unit. I mean, there's definitely a challenge in doing that.
Yeah. So after I finished The Kinsman, I switched over to a new book that I just ordered off of Amazon. It's called Dreamland by Bob Lazar. And if you're familiar with Bob Lazar, this is the gentleman that his story first broke in 1989. He says that he worked out at Area 51. He worked on reverse engineering of propulsion devices from recovered alien spacecraft. Uh, worked for the U.S. government or worked with the U.S. government. That it's not exactly clear what his capacity was, his employment capacity. But anyway, I don't know if you can see that. I did a lot of reading this week. I'm about halfway through it. So pretty interesting. I won't really say too much about it until I'm finished with the book. But yeah, so far I found it pretty interesting. I've always thought his story is pretty interesting. And I don't know. I guess I'm one of those people. I'm not sure if I think it's true, but I want to think it's true. So I have an open mind and an optimistic perspective going into it. So anyway, so far it's been pretty good.
He What was I going to say about that? So regardless of whether you believe it or not, there's a lot of potential material there for fiction writing, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because his book is called Dreamland. His book was written in 2019. In, I believe, 2016, 2015, 2016 is when I wrote the first part of my novel, Rogue 3, Joma Circle. The first section of that book is called Dreamland. And I had originally written and published Dreamland myself, like I said, 2015, 2016, somewhere in that neighborhood. And it deals with Area 51. And in fact, there's a passing mention in my book to a gentleman that worked at Area 51 that worked on reverse engineering of alien propulsion devices. And that was drawn from this gentleman's experience. But anyway, I thought it was interesting that his book was called Dreamland, and the book that I had written uh, a few years before his came out was also called Dreamland. But that's not necessarily.
Why do you think there's that coincidence? Why, like, how
Yeah,
could
I
it?
was going to say it's not really that unusual because Dreamland is one of the alternative like slang names for Area 51.
No.
People that so Area 51 kind of goes by different names, and I don't know. People may know this, but the designation Area 51, where that comes from, is the military maps, the plotting surveys, and all that were done in the 50s when there were setting up like missile test ranges and things of that nature in Nevada and post World War II. The area where this base is on a map was they're designated by numerical areas, and this just happened to be the designation Area 51 for missile testing.
Right.
And so Area 51 is what a lot of people know, but there's an Air Force installation within that segment of the map that segment of the map that's called Area 51. There's a dry lake bed. It's called Groom Lake, and there's a military installation there. And then there's different areas within that military installation. And so there's different names that place is called by. There's a lot of contractors there. They call it the ranch. There's like an air ferry service that goes from Las Vegas to Area 51 to take contractors in and out. That's called Janet is the name of the ferry system. And generally the Janet airline, they call it Dreamland. I think that's primarily what I learned in researching it. So Dreamland is one of the nicknames for Area 51, as is the ranch. Can't remember. There's a couple others too, but
let me ask you this about that area. I discovered recently that I didn't realize that I knew they did above ground atomic testing, and I know they did some stuff that would be pretty questionable by today's standards back in the 50s with atomic weapons. But apparently they were doing above ground atomic weapon testing in areas of Nevada pretty close to Las Vegas. People in Las Vegas would see like the flash of the nuclear explosions going off. And there's footage of people standing around in Las Vegas watching the nuclear bombs go off, which obviously today that would just be no bueno. But it's pretty incredible to see video footage of this from the 50s. Was there nuclear testing going on around that area, or was that going off someplace else in Nevada?
I've not read about that. I wouldn't be a bit surprised, but
is Area 51 in Nevada, or is it New Mexico? I don't even know.
No, it's in Nevada. It's only about 100 miles north of Las Vegas.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm not sure. I wouldn't be a bit surprised. I've not really read about that. Most of the stuff that I've read about in regard to either Bob Lazar or when I was writing my book was more contemporary. Most of the stuff that I've read about's like 1970 up till now, and I haven't read about any testing done at Area 51 on nuclear explosives during that time.
Okay. Yeah, if you ever go and look at some video footage of like people in Las Vegas watching nuclear bombs go off, and you're just like, wow. And then the other thing they did that was definitely not kosher was they were taking U.S. soldiers and they were sending them out into the desert and having them dig trenches, and then basically saying, okay, now get down in the trench and we're going to set off a nuclear bomb nearby, and we're going to see what the effects are in terms of survivability and things like that. And it's just, you're just like, wow, that is almost a crime against humanity. I mean, it's just, by today's standards, it's certainly not acceptable to do that kind of experimentation on human beings. I mean, it's just, it's horrifying almost to watch.
Yeah, that's pretty nuts. I'm going to have to look that up.
All right. I guess we'll jump over and I'll tell you what I've been reading here.
All right.
So I've mentioned this before. I'm reading this book, Worlds by Joe Haldeman. And because of the power being out most of the week, I made a pretty good progress in the book, reading it in the daytime because I couldn't read at night. It got to be nighttime and it was time to go to bed because there was nothing else to do. So I got about halfway through it. The main character is and I've mentioned this before, is a young girl who's 17 to 21, kind of going into college, and she's from some orbiting space colony, and she's come down to the Earth to go to college on Earth, basically. And she gets mixed up in some sort of resistance cell type organization that wants to overthrow the existing US government. And they claim to be libertarian, and they claim to her and her friend that they are peaceful and don't do anything illegal. But there's some question as to whether that's actually true or whether they're more nefarious than that. And so what I've gotten to so far is kind of her discovery that indeed what she thinks is a fairly benevolent group may be not so benevolent, and her fears and her friends' fears, associated with that, and trying to, avoid that situation. The girl, I find her slightly annoying because I've known several females, especially younger females like this, where they sort of have like a harem of males that hang around them, and they're kind of the queen bee, and they sort of, she writes in personal journals, she has personal journal entries in the novel, and she sort of writes in a condescending attitude towards most of the males around her, and about their shortcomings and things like that. Now, it is supposed to be from a journalistic perspective, so maybe she keeps those thoughts to herself, but it's fairly annoying to hear this, teenage, early 20s girl basically disparaging all of the men around her and sort of having contempt of them. And it's interesting that this is written by a male, and I'm curious, to I'd be curious to know, where he got the idea or the inspiration for this character, because I would find her highly annoying, and I would, maybe it's because I'm older. I would not be inclined to hang around her for very long, because it's clear that she's just very frivolous in many ways, and especially when it comes to sex. Although I will say that the entire society seems pretty non-monogamous in terms of their attitudes, which is what we seem to be moving towards. But I just find the character a little bit annoying.
How much do you have left in the book?
Uh, you know, about 100 and let's see, there's 237 pages. Whoops, I just read the end. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's 237 pages, and I'm on page 117, so I've got about 110 pages to go. The thing I do like about it, there's obvious parallels to The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert A. Heinlein, which came out, I want to say, in the late 60s, early 70s, and this is after that. And Joe Haldeman is clearly following in the steps of the market that I'm assuming was created by Robert Heinlein, in terms of libertarian type science fiction. But he and The Moon is a Harsh Mistress involves like a revolt or a kind of American revolution on the moon, basically, where they're casting off their evil Earth oppressors, and forming their own country. He kind of takes that a little bit and sets a little bit on end, because the revolution is occurring on Earth, and it's not as benevolent or necessarily as good as we, or at least as I think it should be. They're claiming to be libertarian, at least to this female character, but there's strong indications that they're very nefarious and probably more just after power, and kind of using her and people like her as useful idiots to achieve that end. And so it's interesting, but he raises a lot of interesting questions in here that he kind of just glances over. Like, at one point, New York is a very violent place, which in the late 70s it was. And she nearly gets raped, or she gets attacked, and someone stops, or a group of people stop her rapist, or she would have been raped, which in the late 70s, when this was written, was very true of New York. They beat the crap out of the rapist, and he's in the hospital in a coma, and the authorities, basically, since it's all socialized medicine, the authorities say, well, this guy's probably a rapist, so we're going to cut off his life support, and he dies. And so basically, it's just like, if you're a criminal and they just make that, or they suspect you're a criminal and they make that decision, they just cut off your life. So it's basically, he gets executed without full due process of law by the state, because obviously they didn't make any kind of determination beyond a reasonable doubt that this person was actually a rapist. It was just, some board or something has decided that you're a criminal and they're going to cut off your life support. So it's kind of like the death panels that they talked about, with regard to Obamacare, or which I think it was with regard to Obamacare, which,
Yeah.
I don't know how true all of that was, but that was the allegation, that there were going to be death panels. And so there's basically like this death panel apparently in this, where they're just like, well, you're probably a criminal. We're cutting off your life support. We're cutting off your medical care.
That's interesting. So is the character, she's not so dislikable that it's going to keep you from finishing the book, is she?
No, and I can't say I dislike her. I just find her annoying, I guess, is the best way to put it. And I've been around girls like that, especially when I was younger, that, like I said, are just kind of a queen bee, and they keep a harem of guys around them, but they're not really committed to any of them. And I don't know if it's because they, it satisfies whatever pseudo self-esteem they have, or I don't know what the reason is, but I've seen it before, and I try especially now, to avoid females that get a little bit like that. But I don't. It's not that I dislike her. I just find her annoying.
Yeah.
But I'll finish it. Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
interesting enough.
Good deal. All right. Well, do you have anything else you want to add, or are we good?
I think that's about it. Hopefully next week I'll get back to figuring out what I want to do in terms of next steps with moving forward with the Matriarchs novel.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. I've got plenty of work to do on revising the Red Phantom as well. All right. Well, hopefully we'll all have electricity and internet come next week. And the interesting thing is people won't be seeing this video until a few weeks after this. So maybe we can all look back on this and laugh.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe laugh. Maybe more like cry.
Yeah. All right. All right. Well, have a good week.
All right, you too.
All right. Sorry, I got to start over.
I don't know why that's backwards. It's really weird.
Ah, shit. All right.
We'll get better at this as we go, I guess. And
What's going into the sausage here?
there's definitely some reflection off my head. Yeah, I may end up in federal prison.